You know what's wild about Jean Grey? She's arguably the most powerful mutant to ever exist in Marvel Comics. She's held the force of a god inside her body, she has burned stars, cradled entire civilizations in her mind, and felt them die. And yet, most of her early life, she was barely treated as a character at all. Jean has died more times than any other superhero in comics history, not because the writers don't care about her, but sometimes I think because they care a little too much. She's become the ultimate sacrifice, the eternal martyr.
She's the only way.
I am Phoenix!
Jean Grey no longer exists.
Jean Grey first appeared in X-Men #1 back in 1963, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. She was introduced as Marvel Girl, the only girl on the original 5-person team consisting of Cyclops, Beast, Iceman, and Angel. And right out the gate, she was presented as a token character. While her 4 male counterparts had dynamic, visually striking powers, ice, wings, acrobatics, octave blasts, Jean's powers were telekinesis. She was able to move things with her mind, that was it. On the surface, it was fine, but the way that it was written in those early issues made it to where she was consistently shown as strained, limited, and fatigued, making her the weakest X-Men by a large margin. And the book made absolutely no effort in hiding. Her role in the team much during the early years were purely reactive, and a team of mutants designed to be outcasts and explorers, Jean was largely the feministic dynamic of a male-dominated team. To be fair, this was the 1960s and the treatment of women in superhero comics was limited to say the least. Jean wasn't uniquely sidelined, she was standardly sidelined, but that doesn't make it any less true. And here's what makes it all more significant. The gap between who Jean Grey was in those earlier years to what she would later become is one of the most dynamic character transformations in all of Marvel Comics. But before she could become a god, she had to spend about a decade being the melodramatic, unrequited romance. Through the late 1960s and into the early 1970s, Jean slowly but surely started to develop more depth. Writers began giving her a voice beyond "I hope Scott is okay." There was also something that's getting quietly established in this era that will matter much later. Professor Xavier had psychically suppressed Jean Grey's telepathy when she was a child. The story goes that when Jean was about 10 years old, her best friend was hit by a car and killed. Jean, being untrained and a mutant at this time, accidentally linked her mind with a dying friend, felt everything, and the trauma nearly destroyed her. Professor Xavier stepped in and erected psychic barriers around that telepathic ability and locked it away to protect her until she was old enough to stably handle it herself. Interestingly enough, some storylines suggest that the Phoenix sensed Jean's trauma and established a tether to save her from dying with Annie. Everything changes in Uncanny X-Men 101. The X-Men are returning from space on a damaged shuttle. The radiation is lethal. Someone has to manually pilot the craft through the storm, and that means certain death for whoever sits in the cockpit. Jean Grey, selfless and refusing to yield, volunteers. She absorbs the flight plan directly from the mind of the pilot. She shields her teammates in the telekinetic bubble, and then she sits down, alone, and flies the shuttle through the radiation field that should have killed her in seconds. The shuttle crashes into Jamaica Bay, and from the water, something new emerges.
X-Men! No longer am I the woman you knew. I am life incarnate. I am Phoenix!
Jean Grey didn't just survive, she was reborn, infused with, or replaced by, depending on which retcon you follow, and we'll get into that, the Phoenix Force, one of the most primal cosmic entities in the Marvel Universe. The power jump is staggering. We go from a woman who got tired pushing a book with her mind, to someone who can reconstruct matter at a molecular level, whose telepathy operates on a planetary scale, who is, by most metrics, one of the most powerful beings alive. This is where Jean's martyrdom stops being a quiet background note and starts becoming the most defining trait of her character. Claremont and Byrne built toward it for years, but the Dark Phoenix Saga is still considered one of the greatest comic arcs ever written, and it earned that reputation. The short version, Emma Frost and Hellfire Club psychically manipulate Jean, driving her deeper into the Phoenix Force than she can safely handle. The power corrupts, the entity consuming Jean stops being Jean and becomes something ancient and hungry. It becomes the Dark Phoenix. During this arc, she destroys a star system and the X-Men manage to reach Jean. Scott reaches her and for a moment she comes back, the real Jean, fighting the Phoenix from inside, but the Shi'ar Empire not interested in mercy as far as they're concerned. Jean committed genocide and the penalty is death. What follows is the most brutal sequences in X-Men history. The X-Men are forced to fight for Jean's life in a gladiatorial arena on the moon, knowing that they can't win, knowing the only real outcome is that Jean dies regardless. And Jean, fully in control of the Phoenix, fully capable of destroying every living thing on the moon, chooses not to. She finds a Kree weapon in the ruins of the blue area and she kills herself. She kills herself willingly because she knows that as long as she lives, the Dark Phoenix can re-emerge. As long as she breathes, the universe is in danger. So she makes a call that no one else can make. She sacrifices herself for everyone. Again. Here's where it gets a little messy and honestly kind of fascinating from a storytelling standpoint. In Fantastic Four 286, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four discover a cocoon at the bottom of Jamaica Bay. Inside that cocoon is the real Jean Grey, alive in stasis, and crazy of all, she has been there since the shuttle crashed in 1976. The retcon established that the Phoenix Force didn't merge with Jean during the crash, it replaced her. It copied her mind, her memories, her personality, and took her place while the real Jean healed in the cocoon beneath the ocean. Everything Dark Phoenix did, the genocide, the destruction, wasn't Jean, it was the Phoenix wearing her face. With that, Jean Grey returned in action in X Factor #1 in 1986 as part of the original X-Men reforming, and the whole arc essentially absolved her of the Dark Phoenix crimes. Now, storytelling wise, this is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a clever way to bring back one of Marvel's most compelling characters while giving her a clean slate. On the other hand, it does strip some of moral complexity out of the original story. The weight of Jean chose to die rather than risk destroying more hits differently when you realize the thing that chose to die wasn't fully Jean to begin with. But here's what doesn't change. Jean Grey still comes back, and she would keep dying, and she would keep coming back. Fast forward to 2001, Grant Morrison takes over the X-Men, which becomes the new X-Men. The whole book gets a radical reinvention. Leather jackets instead of spandex, Xavier's school actually becomes a real school, and Jean Grey finally gets treated like the most powerful person in the room. Morrison's Jean is the real deal. Her telepathy is operating at a level that makes Professor Xavier look like he's using dial-up. She's compassionate, she's exhausted, she carries her marriage to Cyclops while he's emotionally drifting towards Emma Frost, and she's consistently aware of how much power she's suppressing. Then comes Planet X in New X-Men 146 through 150. The villain Zorn, who had been posing as a gentle, kind new X-Men and mentor to the younger students, reveals himself to be Magneto. And during the fight, Magneto, and I say that in quotations, kills Jean Grey. He hits her with an electromagnetic pulse, a stroke essentially, and Jean Grey dies. But then in New X-Men 150, something extraordinary happens. The Phoenix Force resurrects her. Jean comes back more powerful than ever, a true white phoenix of the crown, and in her final moment she reaches through space and time and contacts a future version of Cyclops and helps him defeat Magneto, and then dies again as the Phoenix Force releases her, giving Jean 2 deaths in one arc. But that wasn't the last time we've seen Jean Grey. In the 2005 miniseries Phoenix Endsong, the thread of the last sacrifice continues into the new story. The Phoenix Force, drawn back to Earth by Jean's death, tries to resurrect her again. Jean spends the series literally fighting the Phoenix Force for control of her own resurrection, not wanting to come back if it means the Dark Phoenix returns with her. This is one of the most interesting Jean Grey stories because it directly integrates her as a martyr. She knows the pattern. She knows what happens when she comes back, and she's not sure whether her returns are gifts or curses for her or for the people around her. In the end, Jean chooses to remain in the white hot room, the afterlife dimension of the Phoenix Force, until she's truly ready to return. It's not a quiet death, but it's a voluntary self-exile. Another sacrifice, another choice made to protect everyone else. And she would remain gone from the 616 continuity for over a decade. From roughly 2004 to 2018, Jean was dead, genuinely, consistently dead in the main Marvel universe, which, if you know anything about comics, this is particularly a miracle of narrative discipline. But Jean Grey finally came back in X-Men Phoenix Resurrection, The Return of Jean Grey, a 2017 to 2018 miniseries. The Phoenix Force once again tried to resurrect Jean, and once again Jean had to fight it. This time she won on her own terms. She came back not as a Phoenix host, not as a vessel or a martyr in waiting, but as Jean Grey. Full power, full agency, and she made it explicitly clear to the Phoenix Force that she was done being its avatar. She was done dying for everyone, and she wanted to live for herself. It was generally one of the best Jean Grey moments in years. She rejoined the X-Men, becoming a core figure in the Krakoa era of the X-Men comics, the Hickman-initiated era beginning with the House of X and the Power of X in 2019, where the concept of mutant resurrection became a plot device for the entire species, which is, if you think about it, extremely on brand for Jean Grey, although that didn't stop her from dying and being resurrected again during the fall of X. Jean Grey is the most powerful, if not the most consistent example of a character whose power is narratively treated as a problem to be solved through suffering. Every time Jean reaches her full potential, every time she stops holding back and operates at a level she's fully capable of understanding, the story punishes her for it. The Dark Phoenix arc is literally about a woman who becomes too powerful and has to die because of it. She doesn't turn evil, she gets manipulated into it and then is held responsible for something that someone else has done with her power. She's killed for being too strong, she's brought back to be killed again, and in between she's used as an emotional fuel for the men around her. Scott grieves her, Wolverine pines for her, and Xavier carries grief about her. The pattern is almost clinical. And yet, here's the thing about Jean Grey herself as a character: it's not defined by victimhood. That's the contradiction that makes her so interesting. Every time she's given an actual page or real characterization, she's pushed back. Morrison's Jean Grey is fierce and self-aware. The time-displaced Jean of all new X-Men refused to accept the destiny laid out for her, and the resurrected Jean of the Phoenix Resurrection story told the cosmic entity trying to own her to get out of her life. Here you have Jean fighting, she keeps sacrificing, yes, but the sacrifice is by choice, and that distinction matters. There's a difference between being a martyr because the story won't let you do anything else and being someone who generally values others enough to give them everything that they've got. At her best, Jean is the latter, a woman of extraordinary power who chooses over and over again to use the power in service of life rather than domination. That's not weakness, that's not limitation, that's the actual measure of strength. The tragedy isn't that Jean keeps dying, the tragedy is that it goes on for far too long, and that Marvel doesn't know or seem to know what to do with her when she's alive. Jean Grey is a character who proves over and over again that the greatest power isn't the ability to destroy, it's the willingness to be the one who does it. Jean Grey may be the martyr of the X-Men, but she's also the conscious in its heart. And she's just getting started. If you want more character studies, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment on who you want to see next in a character breakdown, and seriously, I want to know, do you think Jean Grey's deaths made the story better, or they are just holding her back as a character? I'm Anderson, thanks for watching.